it's all set. Thank you for joining in with Eating Love. Today we'll be making a sweet potato brownie and finishing the brownie. If you'd like to follow along with this video, you can view the recipe by clicking the link below and subscribing. And at the link, you'll have access to my website and the recipe, as well as other recipes and more videos. I'm going to get started with adding sweet potatoes and the coconut sugar. So this recipe is gluten-free and vegan and refined sugar-free. The sugar that I use is coconut sugar. Sweet potatoes are already roasted. I make the sweet potatoes brownie for like 4 different accounts that I have for my business. So I always have sweet potatoes on hand, but for at home, when you make this recipe, you'd only need to roast it for about 45 minutes to an hour. Honestly, just depends on how large your sweet potatoes are. When you roast the sweet potatoes, you want to make sure that the sweet potatoes are soft to touch, so that when you touch it, it's like super soft. It's not like there's no resistance. Otherwise, when you're mixing it, it's going to have a little bit of starchiness still left in it, and it'll be a bit stringy. It's not a bad thing. It's just you just want the consistency to be as smooth as possible. If you are unable to, for whatever reason, not find sweet potatoes and you only see yams are sweet potatoes. So I have the sweet potato and the coconut sugar, and then I let that mix for a while, just until I have all of the other ingredients ready. So I just put it on a low speed. So here I have the semi-sweet chocolate chips and coconut oil, and I'm going to put it on a double boiler. So here goes the double boiler. It's not simmering yet, but there's a lot of water. So when you have a double boiler, you really don't need to have that much water in the pot. So I often see like people put like a ton of water in a double boiler, and that just really isn't a good thing, because chocolate is super sensitive and it melts very easily. So it doesn't need to be under a ton of heat, and if it is, it's going to burn. I can literally just leave it here for maybe at this heat, leave it there for like a couple minutes, and I'll come back to it. So now I'm getting all of my dry ingredients ready. I use grams. The recipes that I'll have available on my website will be in cups, because that's just the system that we use here in America. One person's version of a cup can be completely different than another person's. With a gram, it's like 700 grams. It's always going to be 700 grams. It doesn't change. And then we add the cocoa powder, 180 grams. I am using a Hershey cocoa powder. I like that it's not very strong, because the sweet potato brownie itself is pretty strong. There's quite a bit of chocolate in it, so it's just a very rich, dense brownie. And tapioca flour, tapioca starch, they're the same thing. I'm using this to help bind it. As a gluten-free recipe, I use it in all of my gluten-free recipes. And for salt, I always use kosher salt. Any salt is fine, it's just what I prefer. So then you can see the sweet potato and the coconut sugar are becoming smooth and it's breaking down nicely. So now I have to chop up the walnuts. So the walnuts, this is actually my mom's idea, to add the walnuts. She was like, I think it needs walnuts. I'm like, you know what, that's an amazing idea. And I did, and I'm so glad she made that suggestion, because I can't imagine this recipe without walnuts. I love walnuts. The walnuts don't need to be super large, but you also don't want them to be super small. You do want some texture in the brownie. So after all the ingredients are ready, yeah, we're pretty much ready. I'm just gonna cut this parchment paper. I have a technique that I use to cut parchment, and I use the scraps for other things, and this doesn't make sense to use an entire sheet of parchment paper, especially if I'm not going to use it for anything else. So I make it into smaller pieces, and I use it for my deliveries and whatever. So I just cut it in half and cut it in quarters. Of course, at home, this isn't like you're not using like a commercial kitchen equipment, but this is a big ass piece of parchment, so I'm not trying to waste paper. I spray it with Pam just to stick. I don't really use Pam for much else except like just parchment paper to stick to the sheet trays. Thankfully, because it's like not that healthy. So here we are with the chocolate, and as you can see, it's been a little bit more than a couple minutes. At this point, I can take it off the stove. It really doesn't take long to melt. So we can take this off now. Chocolate is done, and that's hot. So let's do that. See how quick that was? It was like super fast, super fast. It really doesn't take much time to melt chocolate. The lower the better, slow and low. That's the way to go. And there are no large chunks. Yes, I did good today. So then I add vanilla extract. And then I let it continue mixing on low speed. So while this is going, I'm going to just mix the ingredients. I just like to have everything mixed pretty well before I added it in. I really love sweet potato, and I love eating it like baked, like sweet potato fries with like sour cream. It's just really yummy, and it has a lot of health benefits. At this point, you just need to make sure that it's pretty mixed in. The sweet potato and coconut sugar are not like stuck at the bottom. Sometimes that happens with batters, it just isn't mixed well. And these bits here, the starchy bits, this is fine. Like once you bake that, it'll break down and you won't taste it at all. So if you see that, it's expected, like you can't avoid it. So I'm gonna mix that for a little bit more just to get that back in. Then we can add the dries, and then we just have to spread it. And we're almost done. Just let this go for a little bit, let it mix really well. It's really dense. You're gonna have to scrape it a few times to make sure what's at the bottom will come up and it's just like incorporated well. So now is a good point to do that. I like this spatula. It's a little bit more sturdy and it's longer. You can see the difference in consistency, how it's like a little bit more wet at the bottom. I don't usually go above level 2 when I'm mixing because I don't want to incorporate too much air when it bakes. And if you're like mixing it for too long, for example, it'll like inflate and then it'll just like deflate after baking it. So when it's done mixing in here, you're gonna have to like mix it by hand. What's at the bottom that wasn't able to be mixed with the paddle, it's hot. So this is a really great consistency. It's mixed really well. So now we're just gonna dump it right into sheet tray. I have a thing where I don't like leaving bits behind. Why waste it when you could not waste it? So this is my handy dandy offset spatula, which I love. I was also using that to mix. I love offset spatulas. A lot of people think that my name is Offset, like the rapper. It's like, come on. I really think my parents named me after rapper. It's so irritating. It's Offset, not Offset. This is a spatula that I use to spread. What I'm doing looks easier than it is. It definitely takes practice. But this particular spatula, I feel like this really helps in getting it smooth. Any kind of spatula works, whatever you want to do. It's up to you. Because I make these brownies for my clients, I mean, even if it was just for myself and I was doing it for home, like I'd want it to look nice. That's just me personally. For this particular batter, because it's so dense, it's not going to like just like flow out, you know, while it's like baking in the oven. Like as it is when you put it in will be how it looks when it comes out. So if it looks like uneven, it will come out uneven. If it's not like spread, the top isn't like nicely like slick and flat, like it's gonna come out exactly as you put it in. If you're okay with that, then I'm okay with that. I don't really care. And because there's so much chocolate in this recipe, this also cooks low and slow. It cooks with no fan on for 45 minutes. Sometimes like a little bit more than 45 minutes, like 50 if the sweet potatoes are like a little bit wetter than usual because they hold like quite a bit of moisture. If you've like let it sit overnight or something, you'll notice that there's a bit of moisture, which is okay. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it will make the batter a little bit wet, which I think is, or I shouldn't say wet, it'll just add a little bit more moisture, which may cause it to cook just a little bit more. All right, this is as flat as it's gonna get. I'm happy with it. And so there it goes, the sweet potato brownie. So the sweet potato brownie is gonna bake in the oven for 45 minutes, and we'll come back and see what it looks like, and I'll show you guys the end product and how it looks after it's been cut, and yeah, be back a little bit. So the timer just went off. So let's take a look at the brownie and see if it needs more time. I don't think it will. I think it's pretty done. Yeah, we're good. Let's try. In the first part of the video, we made the brownie, so now we're gonna cut and proceed with cutting. So whenever I cut my baked goods, I always use a ruler. Because I'm selling, I have to trim the edges because otherwise it just doesn't look nice to have raw edge. It's just, I don't think it's professional. So I trim the edge, and sometimes I eat the edges because they're pretty tasty. Always tasty, of course. What am I saying? Always a bit small. And whenever I cut my baked goods, I always use centimeters. Centimeters are more precise than inches, which the US system is more accustomed to. So it's generally about 30 centimeters. So I just do half and half, basically. Everything I do is pretty much half or like a third. It's pretty simple. I don't trust doing like a eyeballing method because it's just not accurate, and I like consistency. Now that I have 3 marks, and I have this measurement is 4 by 6, and I will get a total of 24 pieces. So before I cut this, I let it sit in the fridge for 24 hours. It doesn't have to be for that long. It could be for about 8 or until like fully set. If it doesn't sit in the fridge long enough, it's the texture will be a little bit weird. Just it'll stick. It won't be as dense. Here, we're done. See, it's so simple. 24 pieces. Ready to go. I just look at that. Look at the gooiness. I just love this brownie. It's so good. It's really dense. It's a dense brownie. Be used for like snack, breakfast and dinner with like vanilla ice cream or something, or just like by itself, or with like some berries or something. Possibilities are endless. I actually made a dessert with this for a couple who had like their diets were vegan and gluten-free, so I used the brownie instead of like a chocolate parfait, which is basically a flourless chocolate cake, and it worked really well. Multi-purpose brownie. I only suggest eating it for breakfast because it has sweet potato in it and almonds, and it's like coconut sugar. Like it really isn't that bad of a breakfast, really. There are worse things like Pop-Tarts, sorry, but really. So these are the brownies. This is what they look like when they're cut. I don't know if you can tell, you can see their fudgy like texture. It's like pretty dense. They're really dense. It's really dense, but it's so good. You see the chunks of walnut? It's dense yet light. It's super yummy. And it's like not super sweet either. It's really nice, like for dessert, after dinner, or just like any other time of the day. It doesn't have to be dessert. It can just be like breakfast. Dish of potato in it. If you're interested in more recipes like this, gluten-free, vegan, please subscribe and click the link below. I hope to see you again. Thanks for joining.